Yozora became one of the best Kingdom Hearts bosses for most people as soon as Remind was released. It didn't take replays nor people to find cool tricks months after for people to realize that the fight was special, that it was distinct from every other boss in the series, while also not feeling out of place. Why was that? How did the Yozora fight become almost unanimously liked while some of the recent Kingdom Hearts bosses are regarded as some of the most unfun in action combat? That is the question for today. A question for which I can't give an answer to. There are people who likes fights for the aesthetic, for what it means for the overarching series, or even how well they are integrated into the series. Other than that, there are people who just like a challenge and pushing themselves and the mechanics of the game to their limit, while not having a care in the world for who or what the fight is. With so many variables, it's incredibly difficult to pinpoint why exactly he became so well liked. But what I can do is tell you how the Yozora boss fight excels in all of that. Whether or not he is definitively the best is up to you to decide. But for a secret boss in a series like Kingdom Hearts, almost everything about him is borderline unrivaled. To me, Yozora is the gold standard, a perfect Kingdom Hearts secret boss. Before we get into what Yozora did right, we should look into some of the other Kingdom Hearts bosses regarded to be very good by most people. Lingering Will, Zodiac Aqua, Roxas, Sephiroth, Larxene, and Marluxia are the first ones that come to mind. They have many things in common, but to me, there is one de facto thing similar with the former three. It's what they represent. None of these three fights are the typical good versus evil. They all have to do with personal conflicts. Roxas wants to find himself against Sora. Aqua doesn't want to lose herself to the darkness. And the Lingering Will repents Terra's terrible choices. Yozora by nature represents exactly that. You think it's going to be like the Roxas fight and you're fighting on Sora's Station of Awakening, but no. It's his world, his rules. He's in control. He can take your Keyblade, your items, your skills. It's almost like you are fighting yourself in a different world, in a different reality. A reality where he's the protagonist and you are the boss. A reality where you can lose. Osaka team had a lot to do and a lot of people to please. After the Lingering Will and a lot of Kingdom Hearts 2's data bosses collectively blew most people's minds and set a new standard for Kingdom Hearts bosses, the Cage community felt a void of new good Kingdom Hearts bosses for years. The main team changed, and the secret bosses that were once iconic became a chore, a joke, a disappointment. A lot of people fell out of the newer combat, thinking that there was no hope. And then Zodiac Aqua came. While it wasn't as bad as some of the ones that came before it, it still wasn't anything special. Although it being on a KH3 tech demo gave some people hope. The original KH3 secret boss, Dark Inferno, didn't do anything to remedy that. It wasn't as obnoxiously designed as some of the previous ones, but who can say that it was intentional, as he only had 3 extremely easy moves to dodge. The community was at an all-time worst when it came to combat. One side abandoned all faith in Osaka team, while the other still holding a sliver of hope. So, as a development team, what do you do when you see so many people not happy with something that became almost iconic for a mainline Kingdom Hearts game? A game many people came back to after being away from Kingdom Hearts for years. A game also where a lot of new people found out about Kingdom Hearts. How do you give them that experience that Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix did so many years ago? Well, the logical thing would be to do what the older good bosses did while adding onto it and making it better. So what is something that all of the previous great bosses have in common that the recent bosses lack? One word: consistency. The heart of the issue of the recent Kingdom Hearts bosses was that they were inconsistent. They randomly break out of your combos, and in a system like Kingdom Hearts, where a humanoid boss fight is based on a revenge system, it doesn't work. You dodge attacks, find openings, attack until you hit the revenge value, they retaliate, and you repeat the cycle. That is in essence how most cage fights work, which is unlike a lot of other action combat games. So when the bosses can randomly break out of your combos, frustration is inevitable. Osaka team were able to solve this with Zodiac Aqua and Dark Inferno, but they did even better with Yozora. But before I get into that, I'd like to discuss one other thing. The bosses being aggressive but not restrictive. They were fierce. By the time you can catch your breath, you feel like you're choking again. But by playing well, you were able to turn that into an advantage. Your party members don't do much when you're fighting against the secret bosses, but they are to give Sora, the player, full access to his kits. Bosses like Roxas can feel slightly restrictive because of that. That issue is resolved with KS3's core mechanic of not relying on party members for Sora's abilities though. Now with all that in mind, how did they finally execute the Yozora boss fight? Well, let me tell you. What they did with the bosses being consistent was genius. You probably noticed that letting the bosses become so consistent has a glaring flaw. They can become predictable. Once you've learned how to evade most of the attacks, it just becomes a game of memory. Because they usually do the same moves for their retaliation, and if you just memorize it, it doesn't become an issue at all. For Roxas and the Lingering Will, it is almost always the same move after explosion. Some of Kingdom Hearts 3's data bosses follow one or two patterns, so no matter what you do, they are always going to be using the same moves with a few exceptions. While it's not inherently bad, as the execution to dodge those takes a lot of skill and there are a multitude of different ways you can handle them. What Yozora did was the perfect solution. You might not have realized, as I only realized it after fighting him for dozens of hours, but Yozora also follows a pattern. But the patterns are so long and different from each other that memorizing them is not a viable option at all. You are almost forced to learn to deal with Yozora's moveset. So they essentially mixed consistency with unpredictability. It took me almost 7 hours of continuous attempts on level 90 Proud to beat Yozora for the first time. By the end, I learned to deal with almost every single move. Even when I didn't want to, I wanted to rush and get to the secret ending as fast as I could because I didn't want to be spoiled, but I almost had to learn his move to beat him. I know people who were playing on critical, it took some of them days, weeks, even months to beat him, when they beat the entire Limit Cut episode in a few days or weeks by spamming items or links. It's because he attacks in an almost endless chain unless you yourself counter his attacks. It incentivizes you to learn his moveset and find openings as they are not clear. Unlike every other Kingdom Hearts secret boss, he will not have clear-cut openings where you can just go and attack him. Let's talk about that for a second. Openings. I think the way Osaka team handled opening in all of Remind bosses were brilliant. You have to create the openings yourself by learning each and every attack. This is why so many people thought Yozora and the Limit Cut bosses didn't have a lot of opportunities to be attacked at first. But as time went on, with more testing and just understanding the bosses more, we learned that almost every attack has a punish. Multiple punishes in some cases. And when you find them and execute them, the rush of excitement is immeasurable. 3 of Yozora's moves in particular are really interesting to me in this regard. The first one is this long laser move. If you just block and dodge, you won't get an opening. It's pretty basic with differently timed block and dodges. But if you get near him during the first laser, he will stop, giving you an opening. You can do this with air step, dodge roll, or even a flash step. But if you line yourselves perfectly, you can also get a counter from this move, which is fantastic. The second one is the gadget capture move. This is also an interesting move where you have to time your dodges and blocks perfectly. You can't just block, or you can't just dodge, you have to do both, which itself is very fun to pull off. If you get caught, then you will probably get to low HP and then he will continue his pattern. But countering this attack was a problem when Remind first came out. Over time, we found that Thunder can break him out. After that, we found that a Keyblade transformation can also break him out. Later on, we found out that you just somehow have to attack him while he's inside to break him out. And so by combining all of this, ultimately we found that with water and a perfectly timed block, you can both break him out and get a counter from this move. It's so cool to see how differently you can handle this depending on what you have and what you want to do at the time. But by far the move that perplexed the community for the longest time is this drain move. He usually does this after the gadget capture move. If you get caught in it, then Yozora will take your HP, your items, and even your Kupo coin if you have it. He can even use the Kupo coin later, which thematically fits the fight so well as he is supposedly the protagonist of this world. But mechanically, this move puzzled the entire community for a while. Most of the time, you just had to glide around until he stopped doing the move. If you got close to him, then you have a chance of losing items. You have a slight opening in the beginning where you can hit him out, but I've never seen anyone do it without losing HP or him gaining his HP back. Of course, you can use finishers, but that isn't reliable. So what do? Do you just glide around for 40 seconds waiting for him to stop? Well, that's what most people did until someone did this. I am not aware of the first person to do this, but you can combine water and air step to reliably counter this move without losing HP and wasting time. Water's casting animation has some iframes, and you can carry the water animation with the air step, which is unlike everything else in the entire game. This is the only place as far as I know where this has actual practical use, but the fact that it is so rare and niche is what makes doing this strat so satisfying and rewarding. Combining different combat elements to elevate each other is one of the most satisfying things in action combat. There are still lots of other interesting ways of handling Yozora's attacks, but these three are the most notable ones in my opinion. The Yozora fight encourages you to utilize a lot of Sora's kits to find openings and punishes easier, making it so that you don't spam just one thing. His attacks are even designed in a way that you can't just hold block with counter shield. They are spaced out so well that counter shield is not efficient at all. There is a slight delay between counter shield's block and dodge, and the spacing between some of Yozora's attacks are just enough so that you can't just hold block, and if you try to do it, you will most likely die. You see, counter shield was way too broken for almost all of the Kingdom Hearts 3 bosses. But Yozora, yes, it does a lot of damage, but you will need to know his attacks to use counter shield well, because he mixes in unblockable attacks, and since counter shield dodge is not reliable after a block at all, you can't just unga bunga it and hope it'll work. It's honestly so good how the fight forces you to learn it. Well, if you're not playing beginner or standard, that is. As of now, there are only 3 of Yozora's moves that doesn't have a direct counter. The mech attack, I doubt this one will ever get a real counter, but it is very consistent, unlike what a lot of people think. If you do the same thing, the mechs will always spawn in the same place, so they become relatively easy to dodge once you know them enough. I don't think the fireball vacuum attack will also get a counter anytime soon, but this last teleport attack is also kind of like the drain attack in a sense that it is very long with no clear openings. But I do believe that we will eventually find an opening. The attack itself is pretty interesting though. One might think that this attack is random, but it actually isn't. Depending on where he appears and how he teleports, the attacks are very consistent. This brings me to the point of the Yozora fight being dynamic, unlike every other boss in the entire series. His attacks change depending on what you do. If a regular Kingdom Hearts boss does a ground attack, then you can easily just glide away, but not Yozora. You want to jump away? No, you can't. He will hunt you down and pin you to the ground to continue his attacks. Some limit cut bosses do this as well, but none do it like Yozora. He can teleport to you and hit you no matter where you are. But bosses being dynamic isn't anything new, you ask. Yes, but being dynamic to this degree hasn't been present in any other Kingdom Hearts boss, which is why I am putting an emphasis on this. This is one of the best things about action combat on a fundamental level. This is what motivates you for replays, to learn the bosses, as there are many hidden things you can find in every attempt. The gameplay loop of finding new things through trial and error in the Yozora fight is nigh unparalleled in any other Kingdom Hearts secret boss. But what this signifies is that the Yozora fight is not linear. There are a multitude of ways you can handle it. Whereas with Lingering Will, He will give you clear indicators of when to attack. For Yozora, you have to make them yourself. Take the risk of getting punished on a fast attack for extra damage, you can. You will require skill, and for that you will get a reward, a counter, sometimes multiple. High risk, high reward. Or you can also play it safe to avoid conflict. It's up to you. If you do that, the fight will take longer. There will be more opportunities for you to be hit. Make the choice. The game gives you options. It's up to you to take it by using all of the game's tools. Making so that almost all of the attacks have punishes, it makes every block feel like an attack, every deflection a preparation. Defense and offense go hand in hand. You are not just protecting yourself, you are actively looking for weak points. And this is what Yozora and the Remind bosses do best. It's a typical formula, but making large strings of attacks have multiple points where you can counter them in multiple ways is ingenious. To summarize this video, the Yozora boss fight in Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind is an amalgamation of all of the great previous secret bosses, while also adding new and interesting mechanics to provide a fresh experience with a familiar assets. It encourages you to try and test out different things in Sora's kit that you usually wouldn't think of or do to efficiently fight him. Thematically, how it is adding a completely new perspective in the Kingdom Hearts series is also very intriguing. At this point, I think the perfect way of describing the themes of this fight is ambivalence. We are not sure of which way the series is going, but what we are sure of is this gives me and so many people hope for the future fights of Kingdom Hearts. I myself am particularly looking forward to the Foretellers fight. Whether or not they can live up to the amount of polish and detail the Yozora fight has, only time will tell.
Shall we? Sorry, but I don't lose.